Hi lovelies, Salibonani Linjani, I hope you're all keeping well. So today's video is all about everything to do with mortgages and homes, like the top level and some of the steps you need to do to kind of make sure that you can get your mortgage application across the line. So if you're interested in buying a home or you're someone that's kind of saving towards that, then this is your type of video. As always, I'd love for you to join my YouTube journey, my little corner. Click on that red button, subscribe, and just keep up with everything I'm doing. And obviously if you enjoy the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. So let's jump straight into it. It's a mix of tips and a mix of steps, but one of the first ones when I made a note and kind of reflected was to make sure that you understand how much you can afford. Now, doing that is a mix of looking at your salary or salaries combined if you're going to be purchasing with a partner, looking at your current employment status, because things like that will matter. So for example, if you are self-employed, you're going to have to produce so much more than someone who's in full-time employment or permanent role. It's very, very different because what they're trying to do is just project and make sure that your financial standing is as stable as possible. So one of the key things that you need to do, whether you're doing it solo or with a partner, is to really look at what you have coming in and what you have as excess and what you'd be able to afford to pay if you actually had a mortgage. Also keeping in mind that I think they don't really want you to pay more than like 40 or 45% of your salary per month towards your property. That's even if you're going to go for a government scheme. They want to make sure that it's actually really comfortable and sustainable. So you having an understanding and a grasp of what your threshold is really, really good as you jump into then exploring what lenders have to offer, what the market has to offer. So after that, the second and really the most obvious step for me is to check your credit score. All of this is really down to how good your financial history is. Now, credit and the concept of borrowing such a massive amount of money over a lifetime, it's really important that they can see a pattern in how you manage your money. There are lots of different websites where you can actually get your full credit file, look at your history and see where you're at. So if you've ever had things like missed phone bills like consecutively, things like that will pop up. If you've had a credit card and you missed payments consecutively, things like that will pop up. If you're not on the voters register, these are all things that can kind of like be rectified. But obviously if you've got anything outstanding on your credit file, or if you have what they consider to be sort of bad credit in terms of any CCJs, that's like a county court judgment, or if you have adverse credit, and this is just basically if you've been blacklisted, which I think lasts for about 6 years, if you miss a payment and then you haven't like resolved it, stuff like that comes up in your credit file, and you can get like a full credit file from lots of different online services. I mean, the most obvious is Experian, but there's lots of different ones where you can kind of get your full credit file and have a little look confidently and just figure out where you're at. So then I think the next thing that we naturally did was to look for an agreement in principle. I'm a little bit more traditional, so I approached my bank initially, and what I did is I was having conversations with the financial advisors there, obviously all pre-COVID because you could just walk in, book, but I think these services are still available. It's just banks are open in slightly more restrictive times. But yeah, so the agreements in principles, most banks as like the key lenders, people on the high street, some people refer to it as that. I like the obvious ones, so you can get an agreement in principle from Santander, Halifax, Barclays, pretty much any big bank. It doesn't take much to actually do it, like you can do it online, and it just bases the calculations on your current circumstances, and then it kind of shows you roughly what they'd be willing to lend to kind of get you across the line. I do want to flag that it's normally based on a 10% deposit of like you having 10%. So it wouldn't take into account you trying to make calculations for Help to Buy if you're considering a government scheme, but you can do separate calculations on the government scheme website itself, and kind of put some numbers in, and then it can kind of give you some figures. The next step obviously then is to look at schemes as well, like with the numbers that you get, depending on where you're at. For some people, as a first time buyer, you'd find that maybe it would make more sense, your money would stretch a bit more by jumping onto the Help to Buy, or the shared ownership route might be a little bit better because then it needs a smaller deposit than something that's really, really significant. And obviously with the banks, they do say like a minimum as in like 10% is the number they set, but ideally you want to jump in to that traditional lender with like 15% of the deposit, which isn't always everyone's comfort or where most people are. So this is where you can kind of use the Help to Buy equity loans, the ISAs, and you can also look into like affordable housing schemes in your area that you're based in. And that's just a side note that most of the housing schemes are actually based on how long you've lived in that area and whether you work in it as well. So that's something to consider. If you've got like a connection to that local place, that's how they can kind of deem that. So when you have a little look at what's available and whether you're eligible, that kind of helps you refine your thinking in the type of property you'd want to go for, what your price range is based on what you can afford, but also based on what they can lend you. Okay, and then the next obvious thing to do is to start gathering all the different paperwork that you need to kind of evidence your salary, evidence that you have this deposit, give people the P60s. So I think the best thing to do is to like create a file. If you have like hard copies to hand, scanning them, because everything was kind of electronic in our experience, and I feel like moving forward with what's been going on with the pandemic, you wouldn't necessarily need to go into an office to present this paperwork or go to your lender. Like, they are putting in provisions where people can submit things electronically, and the same happened with our solicitor. And of course, as you're gathering that information, you can then consider whether you would prefer to do your application through a bank, or if you're thinking about kind of working with a broker, essentially someone that you pay to do these things on your behalf and find you the best deal. And depending on your circumstances, different options work really well for different people. I can go into a bit more detail about, you know, what's a bit better in our experience, whether going directly to a lender versus going through a broker works. I think the level of work that's required and understanding, depending on how you feel, you can be confident in knowing that brokers are certified if you find the right one. They work really well, obviously, if they've come on recommendation. Similar to solicitors and finding the right ones, it just makes the process a bit smoother. We found in our experience we're both professionals, and having that time to do the added paperwork and kind of research wasn't necessarily the easiest thing to do. So for us, it was so much easier to actually have a broker that gave us options, dealt with everything all the way down to life insurance options, different packages that were available to us, and it was just really, really easy and much more tailored for us. However, in the future, who knows, I may just go directly to a lender and go through that experience. Okay, so essentially those are the key things you need to consider to make sure that you can kind of get your first mortgage application across the line. There are a few other things to consider, but I feel like this is when you know that you're moving forward with a potential offer that you have. So you're going to have to consider a solicitor and the fees that come with that, and the support you need to do in terms of surveys. That's another element that needs to be considered as well, and you can approach your local authority or there are companies that do the surveys that are required for the lender. You've also got to think about stamp duty. That's not always the case at the moment, because there was a stamp duty freeze, which I think has been extended. You also need to think about, you know, having to pay your exchange deposit and different things like that, making sure that you're at a good point and you've projected things nicely. So the first thing you essentially need to do is a self-assessment, MOT style review check of yourself, get all your information together, look at potential lenders, consider the different schemes, look at the routes that you want to take, consider taking on a broker, but also factor in some of the later payments that need to come out, as well as that exchange amount. I'm going to go into more detail about agreements in principles and actual application processes that we kind of went through in another video. If you guys are interested, then I will share that as well. I hope you guys find this helpful in terms of some of the steps and things to consider, especially if you're living in the UK. Until the next video, guys, as always, thanks so much for watching. Take care. Bye.